Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is the Marion City Council work session for Tuesday, August 2nd. All right, we'll get started. So there are no items marked for discussion by staff prior to A7. Are there any items the council would like to discuss in particular prior to A7? If not, we'll go to A7. Is that Rachel?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So this change is due to a recent state legislation change. Previously, the policy stated that if the records request took under 15 minutes, there would be no cost. With the legislation change, they increased that to 30 minutes. And then we are also changing the hourly rate after those first 30 minutes. It used to be $5 for every 15 minutes. Now we will charge the hourly rate of those involved in obtaining or reviewing the records. And then we added a section for media storage device charges, which would be at actual cost.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, thanks, Rachel. Before we go any further, I meant to officially welcome our new interim fire chief, Forrest Breeder. So welcome. Good to have you on the team. All right, now we'll proceed. Anything on the remainder of page 2 that requires discussion or questions? None? All right. So on page 3, B1 is not marked. Any questions on that? We'll proceed to C1 under public safety.
So this is the renewal of the 2080s. It's C1 and C2. It's going to be the SRO contracts for both Linn-Mar and Marion school districts. No big changes really. I did provide some statistics, and I apologize, they're kind of hard to see the way those are up there, but we've got 2 SROs. The schools pay for half their salary. We get them for the summer months to use as we need them. Of those 2, one handles all of Marion Independent, which has approximately 2,200 students with 6 separate buildings or schools. Linn-Mar has 7,700 students in 12 different schools. So we're stretched fairly thin with the 2 SROs, but they do a fairly good job. If you can click to that next slide. And again, I apologize, these are so small. These are the incidents that they deal with on the last 2 years. So we broke them down by either the call type or the incident they deal with. As far as dealing with the students, we do a lot of DARE classes, but the other big one that we deal with is behavioral issues. And when I talked to the 2 SROs about that essentially is where they're called, generally going to be called if a teacher or administrator is having issues with the student and they think it's going to turn violent. And so they're either in the room or they're out in the hallway. We've taken the philosophy that the disciplinary stuff is the school's problem and not ours. But if it gets out of hand, that's when our SROs step in. If we can go to the next slide, Rachel. Again, these are the arrests. And again, for the 2 districts broken down over 2 years. Linn-Mar, we had 2,200 arrests in 2020 and 17 this past school year. Marion, we had 11 in 2020 and 11 last year. The citations you can see are mostly for vaping. If you look at the arrest, you're going to see some disorderly conducts, but you're also going to see the simple assaults, thefts, and malicious mischiefs. And some of those are going to have a victim where the parents or the student wants to press charges. So it's not really up to the officer about whether or not they arrest. I think the stats are pretty good. I think they show that for our guys, at least, it's kind of a last resort on what they'll do when they're there. The one thing that we can't capture, and I apologize, is we can't capture the number of positive interactions the officers have, with the kids every day. Both Brian and Tom, Officer Davis and Officer Dobbs, sorry, have both told me that every week they've got multiple kids that want to come into their offices and have lunch with them. They check on the kids that they know are having a hard time, and just sometimes just stopping and having a chat with the kid in the hallway seems to do wonders. So I give them a lot of credit for helping us build that bridge with the students, and I think it's a good program that we'd like to continue. So I would recommend that you sign.
Okay, questions for Chief? Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, on some of those areas, and the one that caught my attention was it had to deal with problems in and around crosswalks, automobiles. I forget how that was characterized. I'm using that as an example. Does information from those occurrences enter into a feedback loop that then addresses as an input to refinement of, say, district policy or our procedures or instruction to, say, students? So what I'm really asking for, it's, any one of those categories can be an input to a feedback loop. And so I'm just trying to understand how that works.
Yeah, a lot of times the crosswalk, and I think we're going to have a brief discussion tonight about Vernon Middle School and some of the issues we're having over there. Some of that comes from this information. But if you look at Indian Creek, in the morning, if you've ever been down there, driving through there in the morning when parents are trying to drop their kids off, we've generally got somebody down there directing traffic or in the crosswalk. Echo Hill is another hot spot. Vernon in the afternoon, especially. Brian Davis spends a lot of time out there trying to shoo parents along in the right direction. So all that plays back in and it's taken into consideration. And I think you'll see that later. And I don't know if Ryan Waller or I is giving that presentation on the recommendation to the TAC, but I think you'll see some of that then.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a really positive program, so I'm in support of continuing it. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anyone else? I agree. I think when you look at the positive impact of the program and the officers in particular on the students, it's definitely a worthwhile program. My observation, having my kids gone through the school system, and it's that they have a lot of positive interaction, and it far outweighs the negative interactions. So fully in support of the program. Anyone else? Okay, Chief, do you have any comment on C3 before we move on to Foundation 2 liaison?
No change. They didn't raise the price. I thought I would have the quarterly stats for you, but they didn't have them ready yet. So I'll have those in your monthly report. But
that's the
it's still a good
same
program. It's the same program that we've had. And
same
it's
expenses the same expense.
same expense. Yes, sir. And it's successful for us. And I haven't seen anything in the last quarter that changes what we've seen already from that. So it's a good program.
Any questions on that one? All right, the remainder of page 3, no items are marked. Are there any, and 4 for that matter? Any items in particular to discuss on those 2 pages? Okay, page 5. Any items on page 5? All right, page 6, B1 is marked.
Yes, Your Honor,
Public
this
service.
is the first reading for the solid waste ordinance to amend solid waste fees, including the monthly base fee. As you recall, DA Davidson did a lengthy report on this. Staff is recommending increasing the monthly solid waste base fee from $18.75 to $2 or $20, excuse me. In addition to that, we are also recommending increasing our commercial collection fees. This is the area in the downtown, like Art in the Alley and those locations that we are recommending doing a small fee increase just to get ahead of the game. You want to go to the next slide, Terrell? And then this is kind of tough to see, but we like to show our comparables. As we said earlier, it's tough to compare service levels now. Everybody's got a different service level or different type of service. as each community is different. But even at the $20 base monthly fee, we are still very competitive to our comparables in the state of Iowa.
Okay, questions?
Your Honor, just a comment.
Yeah.
Ryan, on that comparables with other communities, I was really just, as I looked at your report and the information, I was just kind of struck at how competitive we are. And, you know, as it also attends to the additional things that other cities have tacked onto it. So I just found that very interesting, and it should be somewhat of a confidence builder for our entire community that we are very, very competitive.
Go ahead, Will.
I have a question, Ryan. On your chart here, under Cedar Rapids, it says unlimited cost of cart. I don't understand what that means.
Which one are you referring to?
Unlimited cost of cart on Cedar Rapids.
Oh, and so, so it looks like that might have got shoved over, or it got transferred wrong into the slide. But in Cedar Rapids, you can have as much recycling out at the curb as you want, a lot like us. The only thing you have to do is pay for the additional cart. And I want to say that fee is like $50. So it says unlimited cost for recycling, just like us, but you have to pay for the yellow
Okay.
card.
Gotcha.
Sorry about that. I think it got transpired onto the
Okay.
slide a little bit.
I was confused on it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thanks, Ryan. Okay, under Public Safety C1, this is the final consideration of the UTV ordinance. Any further discussion on that, or questions or
Yeah.
clarifications needed? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Your Honor. Chief, I was looking at the language, and maybe I don't know, maybe this is Kara's bailiwick, but as I was looking at the fine structure that we've talked about, under 75.09 scheduled offenses and fines, it references for UTVs, sections 4, 5, 9, 10, 11, and 14 apply. And specifically at 5 is noise, is for noise violations. But then it also references our noise ordinance. And so I guess the question I had is the fine for a noise violation, is it as stated in this ordinance for first offense $250, or noise ordinance at $25? It seems to me there was conflicting information in the text of this draft that I just wanted to get it sorted out.
Yeah, and I think that's I don't want to say a typo. I think when you look at number 5, it says pursuant to chapter 53, but I think that would clarify if I took that out and left the noise ordinance in there. So the way we did this was we tried to go through and find anything that was not a state scheduled violation that's in our specific code and line those out. And I think I put that noise ordinance in there initially, and after that figured out that we shouldn't vary from what the noise ordinance is for the rest of the city. So I'll go ahead and pull that number 5 out of there to make it more clear. And then part 3 would stand. Violation of the noise ordinance shall be in the amount set forth by section 53.03 of the code for noise.
Okay, so a noise violation would be $25.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Unless you guys elect to change that at some point, but right now that's what it
Okay.
said there.
Okay. Your
Your
Honor, I
Honor.
had,
Your Honor,
Yes, go ahead.
that
Kat.
is on our list of ordinances to review. It is currently $25, but that's on our list of ordinances that we're reviewing and looking at. That might need to be increased.
and I'm sorry, if I homed in on that, maybe, and we talked about it before, but I just forgot. Two last items that I had on this. Number one is, it seemed to me that denoting an effective date for this, should this pass next Thursday or this coming Thursday, is there wisdom of stating an effective date that this would go into force? and it's really a general question because I understand, I think, Kara, you told me it goes into force upon publication, which is, you know, a few days away potentially versus setting a date to say September 1st. And that gives us any desired communications time or whatever that we want to exercise in advance. So I'm just bringing that up as a general question for my colleagues here. Does that make any sense? Upon publication or a stated effective date?
I was just, I don't think that I have a preference, which is why I'm not responding. So I think either one is just fine by me.
Anyone else? All right, I'm not going to be here on Thursday, so I'm going to again just state my my opposition to this, to the way we're moving on this. But I just think that something that's marketed, called an off-road vehicle, marketed as an off-road vehicle, that the industry says shouldn't be driven on streets, shouldn't be driven on streets. And I may be wrong, but I've spent the better part of my adult life trying to working to help move Marion forward and to make it a standout community and make it a leader in so many different ways. And this is just not one of the ways that I think we should be leading. I think this is an instance where we should be a little more careful in watching how something plays out across the state and seeing the experience of other communities, many other communities. Again, we had a small group of very, conscientious people ask for this and have, been very good about educating us and bringing us along. But again, we're passing a law for all people, for all time, not just this specific group of people that's been before us. And we have heard from a number of citizens, probably more than the group that's asked for it, with concerns. We have heard concerns from people with experience in the field. So again, since I'm not going to be here on Thursday, I just wanted to publicly state my opposition to moving forward in such a full-blown way this way, rather than in a measured way of something that's more provisional, which I think we could do. I don't think there's anything in the law that prevents us from having a sunset provision. I think that the optics of that is much different than saying, oh, we'll just revisit it. It's much harder to take something away that's already there rather than saying it automatically terminates and then we'll look at it again. So, okay.
Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned the sunset provision, which was one of the additional item that I at least was wondering about. I think what at least I've said over the 3 readings of this, or the 2 readings thus far, is that we do take a strong posture to set a schedule for ourselves to reevaluate the effectiveness of the ordinance and compliance therein. And because in this particular case, contrary to the normal determinations at the State House, they've left this particular determination at the free will of the municipality. So I guess I view this in terms of a measured approach. I think having a stated posture of formal review over the next year or 18 months gives us that ability that if this starts jumping track and it becomes an inconvenience to those who are not writers or owners of the UTVs, we can back out of it. We can back out of it based on the behavior set that we see demonstrated in the field. And I really want to just emphasize my position is that we work with the UTV community. we keep them aware where we're seeing problems. We have periodic dialogue with them. And Chief, as you gain experience, your crew, you know, has experience with it, that we are aware of that and we're sensitized by that and make the proper decisions as we go through this. So I just want to put an emphasis on that, because if we don't measure performance, then in fact, we're gonna do something that has potentially permanent negative impact on the balance of our residents. So that's kind of where my collection of thoughts are.
Colette, go ahead.
Along those lines, how do we assure that there's an evaluation after every 6 months for the first 18 months? I mean, how do we make sure that happens?
That's falls on the shoulders of staff to make sure that we do that. We'll make sure that it's incorporated in the minutes if that's what the council decides. And then we will just make sure we've got a fail safe to bring it back in accordance with council's desires.
So if that's what we want to do, we would need to have that conversation today or Thursday. If it passes, that's one of the requirements we would want to see. Is that accurate?
And we did, Rachel's indicating that when there was discussion last meeting, we were going back and forth and saying, make sure that it's in the minutes. So we would say that have that direction reflected in the minutes, and then it's on us to make sure that we're enforcing that.
So what is currently in the minutes? I would be in support if we were to evaluate every 6 months for the first 18 months. I don't know if my colleagues see it that way, but in order for me to be supportive of this measure, that would be important for me. So if we can get a sense about where folks are with that, I think that would help me make my decision for Thursday when we make a final decision on that.
I'm actually of the mind to set a marker at every 3 or 4 months. Because I think we'll gain, I think relatively quickly, we'll have reaction and experience of people starting to you know, utilize the UTVs on our streets. And that's going to generate some input that we should probably in short order evaluate and figure out, is it potential for a negative trend of performance, or is it you know, just basically kind of what you would expect with startup, and then 3 or 4 months later do another interim evaluation. So Colette, I'm more on the basis for that 18-month period, if that's the outer bounds, going a little more frequently.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up with that, I'd support the every 6 months. Again, this is going to go into effect in September, and 6 months is going to be the end of February. And so half that period's covering the back end of it's covering the winter time. The first half is covering the other winter time. So I don't think for some couple 3-month periods, you're really not going to have as much activity as you will during that May to September period. So I'd support the 6 months as Colette has suggested.
Yeah.
Agreed. So we cannot put in the minutes, we can't set those dates. We can't have it on record to say we are going to, we say 6 months, but can we say if this were to pass next week, that it would be
This week,
or this week, yeah.
Thursday.
But if it goes like September, September, October, November. You know, February first meeting is a first evaluation, we can't.
If that's the preference, we can certainly do that. Sometimes if we have to cancel meetings or reschedule meetings, then we kind of box ourselves in the corner. But if we stay 6 months, then we will, and we could lay out a calendar and present that to council, looking at all the things that we need to, and have the council bless that as part of it. And as I'm a talker to think, just as I'm listening to this conversation, perhaps we could quickly put together something. If the consensus is to do every 6 months, we can bring something back as part of the meeting on Thursday, if that would be helpful.
Can I add something? Similar to what we did with the racial equity stats, I can put it in every month in your monthly report. If you just want UTV statistics and want to keep a running tally, and then we could do a quarterly one or every 6 months. But I can give you on your monthly report with our stats, I can carve out a special spot for UTV violations if that's what you want.
I think that'd be really helpful to have that monthly, but then also make sure it's elevated to a conversation every 6 months. Then that would really respond to a little bit of what Grant is talking about. And if we were to see there are some challenges 3 months in, we're not waiting for 6 months to have a conversation.
And council would always have that ability if we'll proceed if that's, once we get the consensus of 6 months or 3 months, we'll put that together Thursday. Chief will go ahead, assuming the ordinance gets adopted and passed, then we can do that. And then if council saw something that was a concern or staff, I mean, I think we've talked before too, that if we saw an issue, we would certainly alert the council and then we could flag that earlier and we could have that conversation before that designated 6 month.
I have a question in another direction and help me, I'll play my newbie card. I don't know how much longer I get to play this, but can you help me remember or understand? I go all over in my head, like on a day, users, owners, where these are, where these live, the conversations we've had of off-road the vehicles, nuisances. What is our current piece with like where you can park your boat, where you can have a camper? These are going to park in a driveway, on the road, like where people are parking. I'm thinking of people, if let's say the complaint becomes, and I know we're doing a lot of speculating, which is kind of not, it's good, but it also, some people could question us for that. If a neighbor's like, this is parked out here, just like my neighbor's boat is parked out there, or these are parked in the driveway and it's rusted out and it doesn't look great. And what is our current complaint response, comebacks for those types of things?
Parking of boats and RVs, trailers, things like that. If it's on your property, it has to be on a hard surface. It has to be either gravel or concrete. It can't be parked in the grass. Junk cars, there is some leeway, but if they're not running and they have no plates on them, I believe it's a 48-hour notice to get them moved.
Okay.
In the streets, similar, it's a 48-hour notice. There's size limitations on trailers. I forget if it's 18 feet or longer, it can't be out there other than certain hours of the day for delivery and things like that. But boats and campers can't be in the street. So that would apply, I'm assuming, to this.
And so on that, with cars, like we're not a state that has emissions checks or anything else with licensing the vehicle. So at the DNR, or if it was, since the DNR will do the licensing, are there qualifications for, besides what we've already put on there, like that it's a stable vehicle, that it's a, you know, I'm thinking of somebody who gets, if somebody has a vehicle that gets kind of run down, if it's a car, you know, you kind of start to see what's going to happen with that or licensing. But if somebody has one of these, is there oversight on these and their, I don't want to say appearance because that's a little judgy. I'm talking about like, really, is it rusted? Does it work? Is it half working? Is it usable or not? And maybe that's something we can cover later, but that was just something else I was thinking about with these and the regulation of them being off-road or being vehicles, which we're treating them as vehicles, even though they're off-road.
Yeah, so it's operational. Looks don't matter.
Okay.
And then in the ordinance itself, we've got operators of UTVs must adhere to all traffic and parking laws, codes, rules, and regulations applicable to other vehicles.
Okay.
So they couldn't be parked in the grass. They can't be parked in the street for longer than 48 hours, things like that. The emissions we do not have, but we don't measure that now with cars. We're just not capable of doing that.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you. Moving on to parks.
So the first item we have is the Willowwood pool painting. This is just to educate the council. We're required to paint the pool every 3 to 5 years, depending on the life cycle. Last time we painted was 2017, so we're on the back end of that. This is something that we need to do if we're wanting to have a pool season next year and in the coming years until we get a new aquatic center. So this is something that we did budgeted $100,000. So in the past, we've had a vendor that has always done it. They're no longer in business. They've retired. And so we budgeted thinking that we know we're going to have to have some other vendors that would likely bid for the project. And with the inflation, if we were to rebid this, we more than likely won't get any better bids, and we'd be on a smaller time window just because we would have to be doing it during the spring. This project will be set to be started when the pool closes and will be done this fall time. So we won't have to worry about coming up to the window for Memorial Day weekend when we do open for the pool facility. So it is staff's recommendation that we proceed with this bid for this pool painting.
Steve?
Yeah, just a clarification. I mean, it says they're doing the sandblasting. Who's doing the painting?
So A1's sandblasting will do both the sandblasting and painting.
Oh, that includes both. Okay.
Yes, and this company is doing projects throughout the metro area. They're also doing projects for the new theme park over in Waterloo too. Oh, and then the second item we have on there is just a contract with RDG. We did go out for bid. We had 2 bids come back. This was the lower bid. And this project's updating the Lau Park master plan that was last done in 2011. And since then, there's been a lot of progress out at Lau. But if you were to compare the progress compared to the last plan, there's a lot of differences. And so this would be updating those differences and then looking at the next 10 years as far as the development of that park.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Seth, just a question about that item, updating the master plan. When was the first master plan developed and when did all of that get built? And I'm sorry to be fuzzy on those dates.
So I know I don't know when the first one was. I know it was early 2000s, but the last update was done in 2011.
Okay. All right. So seems like it's a timely thing to do.
It is, and with as much ground that's out there and progress out there, there's a lot of differences from 2011. As you can see, it's this is a growing community, and we have a growing organization, and so there's a lot of changes that happen.
Anyone else? Okay, does that take care of both items then, Seth? Yeah, okay. Engineering?
Yes, Your Honor. So we have a letter from the Marion Independent School District to receive and refer to TAC, Traffic Advisory Committee. They're asking for 4th Avenue and 13th Street to both become one-way for the issues with drop-off and pickup with the kids. So the letter is in your packet and an exhibit there. So this would go to TAC. TAC will review it and come back to City Council with a recommendation. So this is just referring to TAC at this time.
Okay, questions? Go ahead, Steve.
Just a quick question. I was actually discussing this with my wife a few days ago. Do we have any one-way streets anywhere in the city right now? I couldn't think of any.
I don't think so.
Just maybe a boulevard, but not
Not streets.
No.
I didn't think we did either. I was trying to think about that and, okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Will.
Did this not come to council a few years ago? Wanting to did it make its way to council? I know we discussed it, or it was discussed a few years ago.
Not while I was city engineer, at least it is part of the safe routes to school. That was part of the Marion Independent School District plan. But I don't think I've brought it to you.
Is that when we brought it up? Sarah, did you have something?
Just trying to remember when it was or what happened.
Yeah. Did you have a
As
follow-up?
one of the orchestrators of the Safe Routes to School plan back in the day, and this writing of this plan, I remember this vividly. And so just a clarification, is this for just during drop off and pickup, or is it permanent?
So at this point, it's taking their letter and taking it to TAC.
Let them
TAC will
decide.
give a recommendation back to council. So at this point, you're not acting on anything except for their letter.
Okay,
We're just sending it to TAC.
just sending
Yes.
sec. I'll speak out now then as it goes forward. Wholly supportive. This was a very comprehensive plan on the Safe Routes to School plan. And while it changes, I will say the national walkability experts that we brought in observed traffic with speed cameras at every location. And this location and across from the high school, they were actually mortified as one of the two of the worst things they'd ever seen when it comes to kids being able to get in and out and the traffic patterns that happened. We told them it was bad, it was bad. This was one of the recommendations to try to shift all of this. So wholly support it. We walked the entire district multiple times, multiple different temperatures. And it was really a unique opportunity because of the size of the Marion Independent School District is so small compared to others. Most of the time you don't do a comprehensive Safe Routes to School plan for an entire district. You do it for a couple buildings, but we were able to bring it all in. The gentleman who worked on this project also worked on the alley project with us as part of that design and walkability. So they've seen a lot of different things. So thank you. I agree with this coming up and wholeheartedly. If anybody has questions or if we want a review of that plan, it still lives and I think I still have it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Colette.
So I get this is just going in front of TAC. I would say, I hope that something passes as a user of that for several years. My kids are now older. I was shocked that there was never a child that was run over in the process of the cars coming and going. It was really, really dangerous there. So hopefully, if this isn't the resolution that's brought forward, there's a resolution by our experts to help us determine a better way to make that a safe place for kiddos.
And I'll just remind city council, whatever recommendation TAC gives, ultimately it's council's decision. So you are the deciders.
Remind us who's on TAC. It's you. And
So it's myself, city manager, police chief, fire chief,
Okay.
Ryan Miller, Tom Trahern. I can pull up the website, but there's the list is on there. There's a couple other police officers as well.
okay. All our experts.
Yes.
Everybody but Seth.
I do believe we have the arborist on there.
We do have the arborist on
I
there.
do believe we have the arborist on there.
It's really a comprehensive list. Okay. Next,
So the next item
B2.
is just accepting the contract with Midwest Concrete. So we had the public hearing and the bid tab we went through that last time. So they were the low bid, 108.9% of the engineer's estimate, $175,305. Late start date of 8/22/22, 35 working days and $300 per day in liquidated damages. So this is replacing all of the sidewalk out there around Lau Park. So we just got done with the HMA out there. So now it's replacing all the sidewalk that's damaged out there. And expanding some on the north side.
Okay, is that clear? Questions? Next is F1 under community development. Mr. Trahard.
Yes, the council's been briefed, and I think we've walked through conversation several times over the last right through regulations within the zoning code. Thursday, discuss the ordinance. Couple critical things to this ordinance is establishing minimum lot size, and then also spacing before and after any boards. But I think the biggest piece is just that design element that doesn't allow the alignment of that facility to go back. The problems that we've seen, I think, both here and traffic are a result of easily stacking the cars out into the street causes safety concerns. So this is, we will limit that to the design process.
Good. Questions? Everyone's clear on that? Okay, F3, Tom?
So on Thursday, there'll be a public hearing Plan and also a rezoning request for property that's located south of Tower Terrace Road, west of Winslow. The property is the old Horsey property. There's the next slide. There you go. You go out Indian Creek Road and you take a left under Winslow. You'll see the house that sits way back, kind of on the edge. More road area in front, used to be horses and pasture there. This property is sold. Broadwood, Atwood Reynolds, Steve Atwood's development property. Is proposing to develop some condos on the property, including keeping the existing house. So there's a in the packet. It's in the packet that outlines what's being proposed. Really, it's taking it from an ag use, attached land use definition from detached to attached, physically attached units, and rezoning the property to SR4. Within the proposal that includes Loop Street, the project went to the planning commission. That's the last meeting. There were discussions from the commission's perspective that there's an existing house, a single family home being surrounded by condominiums. The developer actually owns the house, so there's not a separate ownership. I believe the house is actually sold. Understand the concept is being developed. There is a couple of commissions. It's not pretty straightforward.
Questions? Go ahead.
Tom, just a couple of random questions, and I know we're early in the process, but will these be rentals or for purchase?
You know,
Maybe we don't care, but
that's a good question. The developer, the way we review it is based on side by side kind of. I call it
Right.
Things up the street.
yeah. So the other, I guess, two items I have is there any floodplain concerns for this property, or doesn't the Indian Creek flood up that far?
none of the properties, none of the floodplain would be impacted.
Okay, then
But there are portions of property that
so in the diagram for the preliminary plat, I see that existing driveway to that individual home is removed, and then there is a new access point that will go into the development a little bit to the south. And so two points of inquiry on that. One is do we have any fire department concern about only having one access point going into that multi-structure development? And I'm just a little curious how that's going to ultimately align with the extension of Vaughn Drive once that's punched through over to Winslow Road.
the property that develops the review, but there's no concern in standards. The developer like to see we have some requirements required setbacks from the intersection of the power grid. So that we don't put stacking to block that road. So we actually wanted them to take Osage Trail south to the east-west road to access Winslow. They would prefer to have essentially two cul-de-sacs that are being developed. But ultimately, what we find in engineering more specifically areas where, especially if you have one-way in, it's a cul-de-sac and traffic stack at Tower Terrace Road in Winslow, because that will be a direct access someday with east-west of the bridge to property. We have a four-way intersection. It's not going to be easy to get out and keep traffic, so that's in a stack. And we got a 300-foot spacing so we can have access to the road. So we require that they actually develop this manner opposed to having access.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I'll soak on it and maybe we can scribble on the back of a piece of paper here later.
And we're providing you, I mean, ultimately, there's gonna be 3 readings with the rezoning before the preliminary plan. So we like to get that to packet, so by all means, if you have questions, I can feel free to reach out to us. We can answer ahead.
Thank you.
The comprehensive plan currently shows what? It's single family. Okay.
Yes.
We won't have it as specific.
Do you have any concerns about just the sheer number of condos in that one corner of the city? Like, it's just a sea of condos. Sea of, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
You wish it was more dispersed.
Yeah, I mean,
Any questions? All right, budget discussion.
Thank you. As we anticipate the development of the fiscal year 2024 budget, it's important to understand how we performed into the 2022 estimated budget and how that's going to impact our fiscal year 23 budget. So before we actually get into the numbers, I just want to remind City Council not to be deceived like Prince Eric was by Ursula and the Little Mermaid, because these numbers have not yet been finalized. There is a transfers on the agenda, item A9, regarding benefits, because those items can only be used for benefits. And then also just a note, a trend that you will see throughout the presentation is that we were under budget in the salaries and benefits area due to turnover. So looking at the general fund summary, the numbers that I'm presenting are the actual versus the estimated. If you recall, when we put together the 2023 budget, we always budget off of that 2022 estimated to figure out where we're going to end the fund balance. So looking at the numbers, you can see our total revenues exceeded by our estimates by 958,000, and our expenditures were actually under our estimate by 1.5 million, which right now would look like that we're going to end the fund balance with an increase in 2.48 million. And again, this is before making some adjustments for fiscal year end. So getting into kind of the detail, what is making up those numbers? On the revenue side, out of the 958,000, you can see 873,000 on the screen here. Franchise fees, building permits, interest revenue. The Enrich Iowa funding was anticipated, I believe, at 11,000, ended up coming in quite a bit higher. Property taxes, transfers in, program fees, and inspection charges. Some of these items were hard to predict. Franchise fees, we know with energy prices increasing and that being computed off utility bills, we did see an increase there. Building permits, we're still seeing an increase due to repairs from derecho as contractors have work scheduled out. And interest revenue is starting to trickle back up as interest rates are rebounding. Looking on the expense side of the equation, full-time salaries, 588,000 under budget. I would like to note that there are 29 full-time positions across the organization that were vacated, I should say. 27 of those were attributed to the general fund. So at some point there was a vacancy. I'm reading facial expressions. The 275,000 in health insurance is either due to vacancy and or we budget when there is a vacancy at a family plan, people may opt to use us or may opt to single plan or any changes in the open enrollment. The software line item is attributed to the police department's records management software mostly. It's just timing of the project and expenditure. Part-time salaries, 136,000 of that number is attributed to the library and 23,000 to the recreation department. Vehicles, the overage is actually due to a police K-9 vehicle that I believe we had a donation to offset. IPERS, again, is just related to the vacancies. On the contracts, the technology areas were police, records management system. This is more the data storage element part of that, City Hall and IT. And then the contracts, other services attributed to the airport, finance. If you recall, we did the RFP, consultant to help with the RFP for investment banking and investments, and then also the library's director search. All in all, 1.2 million, if you were to actually look at all salaries and benefits, makes up the majority. So 1.2 million out of 1.52 million is all attributed to salaries and benefits. Looking at it from an organization standpoint, rather than specific to accounts, library at 369,000. Again, that's primarily salaries and benefits, with 136,000 of that being part-time and 5 full-time positions. Police department, 7 full-time positions and 221,000 in software. Building department, 2 positions and 1 new that there was a delay when we filled the position. It's 178,000 worth of salaries and benefits. City manager was 3 positions, 160,000 primarily salaries and benefits. Parks department, 2 full-time positions, 100% of their line there is salaries and benefits. Communications center was 1 full-time position, 92,000 worth of salaries and benefits. And the fire department, operational supplies actually made up a portion of that one, as well as utility costs going into the new facility. So I kind of provided you some of the detail that is making up that variance of 1.5 million on the expenditure side, 958 on the revenue side, for what looks like an increase in the general fund reserve of 2.48 million pending final numbers. So here are some of the upcoming updates coming on the general fund balance. The transfers that I mentioned already on the agenda. There are some carryover requests that we are still reviewing as far as items that would have been either been ordered or should have been purchased in 22, but have not yet been, that will see the expenditures in 23. Some unexpected overages we're already aware of as we look to the 23 budget. The general insurance premium was above budget. Again, we're still monitoring those energy prices and seeing what we've budgeted both for franchise fees on the revenue side, but also on the expense side as far as utility costs. The E911 radio maintenance agreement that has been discussed regarding the tower maintenance agreement, Lynn County wide radio system. And then some new items that will be coming forward for City Council's consideration. We had increased engineering staff by 2 individuals with the fiscal year 22. However, there were not vehicles budgeted. I think there was some question as to whether the positions would end up with a car allowance or not, but they are not eligible for car allowance being part of the union. And so they do need 2 vehicles for engineering staff, and then also the compensation study coming forward. Any questions on general fund? I know I've thrown a lot of numbers at you.
Go ahead, Colette.
Quick question on the revenue side. What's in Rich, Iowa? Can you remind us what that is?
I actually will let Bill speak on that because he can speak more intelligently about it than I can.
Thank you.
Good evening. So Enrich, Iowa is a revenue stream that comes from the state library, comes from the state of Iowa. It is based upon usage of our library. So the more our library is used, the more checkouts we have, the more programs we hold, the more money we get from that program. So that's that Enrich, Iowa in a nutshell.
Yeah, just a question on that.
Here.
Yeah, I seem to recall that you told us that electronic checkouts don't count in that
They do not.
formulation.
No,
So
but it's
it's a-
physical checkouts only.
Okay.
So and any physical materials, whether that be books, audiobooks, DVDs, Blu-rays, circulating video games, physical material only.
Okay, thanks.
Not for you.
Okay, thank you.
Leanne.
Thanks, Bill.
So on the salaries and benefits, and this is going to become a recurring theme as you look at the other funds. When you get to the road use, sanitary, solid waste, and storm sewer. So all of those funds had a lower amount for salary. And you said that's due to vacancies. I want to make sure we have a good definition of that. So I can think of it coming from two aspects. One is a person leaves, and then you got a gap of time before you replace that individual. Or you scheduled a hire date of April, but you don't hire them until September. And I know it can be the combination of the two, but is there one or the other that's really the majority of the vacancy dollars that you're referring to?
I don't know that we have that detailed of data. I mean, we could subjectively say, I don't know if Kirsten has more insight on that. We need to speak into the mic.
We don't have that level of detail right now, how it's calculated. Historically, I believe it's been the person that it's vacant, but not a pushed out hire date.
Yeah, and I know it's a difficult number because you're gonna budget for those positions
Right.
being there for the entire year, and you're gonna have an estimated hire date. You're gonna start salaries and benefits from that date. But as I looked at the preliminary numbers so far, I do have to compliment how much more accurate our budgeting process overall was this year. I mean, my gosh, the property tax, you nailed it on the head within $44,000 on the size of that number. That is nailing it right on the head. So I looked at a number of other aspects of the budget, and I know salaries is always a tough one. Every time I did budgeting when I was a vector, you always want one or two aces up your sleeve in case there's some surprises. So obviously the franchise tax is one of those aces up your sleeve so that you be conservative on that. And I understand that too. I'm okay with that. But anyway, I just wanted to make sure we understood the vacancy number.
Piggybacking off your vacancy question, I did run what is called a termination report in our New World system, and we've only had New World since 2016, so I can't go back very far. So when I say termination report, it means all terminations, whether it was voluntary, involuntary, retirement. So looking at the numbers, fiscal year 2017, there were 7. In 2018, there were 10. In 2019, there were 20. In 2020, there were 17. In 2021, there were 20. And in 2022, there were 30. So we have seen an upward trend.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
So I will say I have spent the bulk of my time in analysis right now in the general fund. But moving on, I did want to at least highlight the different funds, the operating funds. So road use fund, on the revenue side, we were within $13,840 on our estimate for revenue. On the expense side, we were 1.75 million under budget. So again, diving in, variances greater than 50,000. I just put all of them on one slide here. Transfers out to capital projects. Winter supplies, that one's always a hard one because you always budget for a heavier winter year and then may or may not end out like that. Street supplies, full-time salaries, traffic supplies, overtime pay, project costs, equipment, health insurance, and then technology contracts. Any questions on road use? So looking at the sanitary sewer fund, 212,000 on the revenue side, and then 426,000 under budget on the expense side, for a total of 213,427 in the difference on the fund balance. Variance is greater than 25,000. On the revenue side, collections were under by 5,000 approximately. Hookup fees were actually the other direction, approximately 38,000. And again, you're seeing full-time salaries, 28E contracts, contracts other, project costs, and vehicle operating supplies.
Go ahead, Steve.
Is it the sanitary sewer fund that we've got the bank covenants?
We have it actually on
Where we-
sanitary sewer and solid waste, but sanitary sewer is the one that has the audit finding currently.
That's the one in violation, and that requires, what is the covenant? Is it number of months? Can you go back one slide, Terrell?
It's
is it-
125% of net operating revenue, I believe.
120, okay.
125%. I will note that the ending balance that you look at of 1.2 million, 1.05 million of that is attributable to the project, the Public Service Maintenance Facility project, and item A8 on the agenda will be establishing a new fund to segregate operating from that capital project.
Okay.
So moving on to the solid waste fund, 118,000 was the difference on the revenue side and 241,000 on the expense side. And then just a note, out of that 3.6 million ending fund balance, approximately 1.05 million is attributed to the Public Service Maintenance Facility, and again is under item A8 for transfer into its own fund. So variances on the solid waste fund include garbage tag sales. That one's been quite unpredictable the last few years at 105,000 over budget, and collections were actually pretty close with 30,676. Full-time salaries, project costs, vehicle operating supplies, and health insurance are what's making up the differences on the expense side. The Urban Forest Fund, we're looking at a $284,000 difference on the revenue side and $129,000 difference on the expense side. And the biggest one on that is the revenue from the harvest. Any questions on those? And the final one, Stormwater Management Fund, approximately 63,000 is the difference on the revenue side and 614,000 on the expense side. And the difference is on the revenue side's collections, on the expense side, technology contracts, project costs, full-time salaries, and health insurance. There's no more questions on those. On the capital improvement program, actual less budget actually equaled 16.35 million under budget. We did provide a pie chart there, so you can see that pretty close to 50% is on transportation. 13 million was on transportation, and I believe that even excludes the annual program, which also is transportation, but there's a pie chart there for you. Variances greater than 750,000 on the screen here for you. A lot with the public service facilities and the fleet there. Neighborhood street improvement projects, CMAR trail projects, those are things that, because construction season is basically at the end of one fiscal year and the beginning of the next fiscal year, it's hard to determine exactly when expenditures will be made. Any questions on that?
Your Honor, if I'm gonna just add on to this slide, when we were, as a staff, as we were reviewing this presentation and going through, we recalled the commentary that we had from council during the budget work session in January. And just making sure that what we're budgeting in our capital improvement program, that we're actually going forward and spending. So I think this slide is an important one, and that a lot of what is remaining from that CIP budget is tied to the facility, a lot of the stuff that's happening over at public services, and then the timing. So I just want to reinforce that, but that is something that we heard loud and clear from you all during our budget presentation back in January. And that is something that we've already started working on and talking through as we start implementing the CIP for this current fiscal year.
And then the last slide that I have in the presentation is just kind of a reminder of where we're at in the budget calendar and where we are headed. The next item that should come before City Council should be the environmental scan. And I also should note, while this was a preliminary financial report, there is a report due to the state on December 1st that typically comes to City Council in November. So you will see a more formal presentation at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Leanne? All right. Radio towers. Who's got that one? Chief?
So when I came to you last time, I explained what was going on with the radio towers. We'd entered into an agreement with the county and Cedar Rapids back in, I think it was like 2010, to put a statewide, or I'm sorry, a countywide radio tower system in. There's been some funds dry up from the 911 system that we're gonna have to start backfilling to pay. You guys had some technical questions. You had some questions about that split. We talked about initially it was a 50-30-20 split. You wanted me to pull some more data to see if that was still accurate. So what I thought I would do is I've got Terry Brennan from Raycom, they would be the vendor on this. And I thought I would just let him come up, spend a few minutes telling you guys basically what he told us is here's what we're looking at going forward. Here's the advantage of the maintenance contract. Here's what we're looking at if we go piece by piece. Because again, Grant, I think you'd ask, or Councilman Harper, you'd ask about how do we know when a microwave dish is obsolete? I don't know when somebody tells me this. So I'm gonna let them talk and then I'll talk to you about the data we get it on the split and answer any questions you have.
Thanks, Chief.
Hi, again, I'm Terry Brennan with Raycom. I'm one of the owners of Raycom. But as Chief mentioned, we've been working with the entities in the Lynn County area, Lynn County, the city of Marion and Cedar Rapids for the last 12 years or so on the communication system. So yeah, at that time, consolidating all the communications for public safety was the goal and what was accomplished. And I don't know, I'm gonna guess that was a $30 million project or so when it originally kicked off. So we're at the point now where there's a lot of that technology that has been aging out. And there's a lot of different technologies that are associated with the communication system for public safety. You have some types of servers and switches and software that has a life cycle of 3 to 5 years. You have other longer lead items like the microwave that can have a life cycle of 10 to 12 years. And then there's a lot of things in between. So we're at the point now where what we have been working on for the last 18 months or so has been working with the Radio Governance Board and the E91 Council to basically put a plan together for how to take the 12-year-old system and make sure that it's going to last another 10 years. So that's what the budgeting and all has been involved. So you mentioned the microwave. For instance, the microwave has already been end of life by the manufacturer. So that's a case where we have to address that. There are servers like the core switches and all that controls the radio system. That has a major upgrade that has to really begin with probably in the next 6 months. So the objective of the Radio Governance Board and E91 from a budgetary standpoint was to project all of these incremental upgrades and changes that we know are going to have to happen over the next 10 years to keep the system fresh and reliable and evergreen, if you will, but do so in a way that it's budgeted and try to level load the budget. So that's what we've done. And that's what the plan has been that's been moved forward. And I think that I don't really have visibility to the splits and what the City of Marion's portion of that is. But I think, what was it, Chief? $800,000 or $900,000 of it, I think the 911 board is covering. And then you guys have your arrangement to try and split the difference. So if you have questions about the technology, but it's everything from the the equipment that is at all the tower sites to the equipment that is housed within the 911 call centers for the dispatchers and for that operation. So happy to answer any questions.
I know Grant has a question.
So in aggregate, what I think I hear you saying is that there's going to be a series of sub-projects to upgrade elements of the total system.
Correct.
And there are some of those elements of the system, some components or component families that need to be upgraded sooner rather than later.
Correct.
So as we work through this entire process, and I think you said 10 years?
Correct. Mhm.
At the end of that 10 years, are the components that we that we did first, are they going to then enter into a condition where lo and behold, they've got to be updated in year 11?
That's a great question. There are actually some components that we will plan for 2 replacements. Like for instance, I mentioned the core switching, the core switches. We have to do one of those upgrades here and really begin it in the next 6 to 9 months. And we plan on doing another one probably 5 or 6 years down the road. And so, and the way this has been done and the way it's been level loaded is that there's also an element of an insurance policy across the top where the risk has been shifted to Raycom, where it is our job, even if there are unforeseen components that age out, or if we have to replace something a second time that we didn't anticipate, those risks are now borne by us. So that our commitment contractually with the group is that we have to keep the system evergreen and operational. So anything that ages out or breaks, or, you know, unless it's really an act of God, right, where a derecho comes through and insurance steps in, and anything else is now Raycom's responsibility to replace and maintain.
So this just ends up being a continuous cycle of component change out over time.
Right. Yeah, components and subsystems. And the way I think if you project out to 10 years from now, there's a great deal of that system that is new, is evergreen, it's all state of the art. And then I think then you just look at the next block of time, whether that's 5 years or 10 years, and you have the ability to kind of renew and keep it going. So
just one last question, Your Honor. So as we move deeper into this first 10-year cycle, let's say we get to year 7 or year 5, do we end up having any technology integration issues that will be problematic for us?
Not for you. They're going to be challenging for us because we have to keep the system live and operational throughout every transition to migration of what I would call subsystems, you know, whether it's subsystems or components. Yeah, we have to keep it live, and that's Eric Hoover in the back, and he leads our technical operations in the area, and that's a part of every implementation.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Steve, go ahead.
So I mean, I can understand why the chief is making this recommendation in the county and Cedar Rapids, because they know they're going to have a 911 system that is always going to be functional, operational, and reliable. So I understand why they're doing that. Who's making all these decisions today or in the past several years on when this stuff was getting replaced? Because obviously they didn't have your expertise,
right,
to manage it. So who's making the decision to do it today?
You know, that's another great question, because I'd like to think that this model is some brilliant revelation that we had, but like in a lot of ways, we've kind of been pushed into it. I think you've seen more and more of this in the IT space. You know, I think contractually, and we had customers, actually the ones down in Johnson County, that really drove us to come up with this model, because budgeting is a nightmare, and trying to foresee technological changes and when they're going to hit and when they're going to occur has been a nightmare. And then you go back 2 years ago with COVID. I don't know if you guys have seen supply chain issues, but it's actually accelerated a lot of replacement technologies because there were supply chain issues with the old version. So some things are getting end of life earlier. So we were really kind of pushed into it, and it was a it was a major project trying to come up with a plan to do this. Because, you know, like even today, and I think, you know, financially, the amount of money that's in year one doesn't cover what needs to be done. I mean, we're probably looking at, you know, $4 to $5 million worth of technology upgrades that we have to do to the system within the next 18 to 24 months. And there wasn't great visibility to that from a budgetary standpoint. And so that really caused problems because nobody wants to have a $3 million upgrade one year, and then the next year it drops down to $500,000 worth of need. So that's why I think trying to level load this and come up with a plan, it's been a challenge, but I think we have something that everybody thinks is gonna kind of solve the problems.
I got another question, but it's for the chief. And that is, on the screen, we've got the E911 board, $900,000 each year. That is the same number for each year. Why is that the same number? Why doesn't that change? Does the funding source ever change? It's just kind of seems unusual that a number for 10 years would be exactly the same number
I
and not
believe
adjusted.
that's what they were comfortable with budgeting within their budget, knowing they're going to get less and less going forward. So the 900 is what they felt comfortable with out to the 10-year mark. After 10 years, I don't know where we're going to be.
So in other words, for this 10-year, for this discussion purposes, that is a number they're comfortable with, but that number may be adjusted on an annual basis.
Could be, but yeah, they were budgeting for the 900
Okay, remind us how that number gets funded.
through the surcharges on phone lines,
Okay,
on cell phones and hard lines, and of course,
hard lines are
decreased.
going down
Yep,
like this and so, yeah, okay.
correct.
That's right. I remember having that discussion in the past.
And I think that's why they don't expect substantial change unless there's
Right.
dramatic differences in population or something.
I understand that. All right, thank you.
Other questions?
Okay,
Great.
good. All right, thank
so
you.
much. All right, that brings us to the closed session.
Do you want to,
Oh,
sir,
sorry.
do you want to talk about the split?
Oh, sorry.
I'll come back
Go
up,
ahead.
just because people made fun of me for walking up here.
There is 2 minutes left in Rachel's schedule, so.
And that's why I asked Terry to come, because I knew some of that stuff I couldn't explain. So when we talked about the original split, it was 50 paid by Cedar Rapids, 30 by Lynn County, and 20 paid by Marion when we first set this up. We thought that that's what we were going to go with. I believe this set of numbers is new. So what we did, that was based off of, when they first set it up, it was based off population, it was based off the size of the agencies, call numbers, the number of radios, and the number of personnel. They also shared, and I don't want to get too technical here, but we have mutual aid channels where we all can use together. If we have an incident at Lindale Mall and we need to have Lynn County, Cedar Rapids, and Marion all on one channel, they kind of divided that up equally between the three agencies. So what I did was, after I talked to you guys the last time, is I went back and we had them go down and look at actual airtime. When you click your microphone, it's going to identify as a Marion fire or police radio. If somebody else clicks it, it's going to show up as Lynn County. So what that came out to is we went back 6 months, it came out to like 11.6% is Marion actual air traffic. I asked them to go back another 6 months. I was trading emails with Sheriff Gardner there, and that came out to 11.4%. So we're right at about 11.5%. I know that's going to fluctuate from year to year, but I'm comfortable around that 12% mark, thinking that we're in the ballpark there. That takes into account those shared channels on how much we're using those. We had questions about the volunteer fire departments and things like that were set up on the system, and I stand corrected. I had to go back and verify a couple things. Hiawatha, Robbins, Mount Vernon, Lisbon police departments are all under contract with the sheriff's department to dispatch. So they pay into this system through their contract with the sheriff's department. What I was mistaken on is the volunteers. Any of those other agencies that have access to this don't use it as their primary radio frequency or radio system. They use it in emergencies if they have to contact another agency whether it be another fire department, another police department only. So it's not like a day-to-day. So it's almost like a de minimis use situation. I know we talked about it a little bit afterward, and I got some clarification on that. So again, we came down, we're right around that 11 to 12% mark on airtime. If you look up here, the bottom left, the first 3 years, that was at 11.6, I believe, those figures. So it would be 115 for the first 3 years. It goes up incrementally from there. But that's kind of what we're looking at. If you went to 12%, it would be roughly 119,000 a year, which is significant over, I think originally we were at like 190, 198, I think at the 20% mark. So it's a significant savings. I honestly, I don't know what the alternative is. We get out and try to set up our own radio system and it's going to cost us much more than this. So I'm not sure that we've got, an alternative to that. We could go get Nokias and go back to push to talk, but I know the guys would complain about that. But I know Sheriff Gardner had talked to the Board of Supervisors the other day, and he was going back in tomorrow and was kind of wanting to know what we were comfortable with or what you guys were comfortable with in a ballpark for percentage. I don't know if you're ready to make that call yet or how you want to do that. Is that
great?
Chief, so the airtime, 11.62%. Is that airtime at all influenced as we would have our population and the size of our jurisdiction increase?
Yeah, I think as you get more people from Marion Police and Fire on there, you're going to have more talk. If you get additional calls, you're going to have more people talking. I guess the trade-off is the other agencies are growing as well. So I don't know how to predict that offset.
Right.
But I think that percentage, 11, 12% is where it seems to fall right now. And I don't know what it was back when they started this, when they did the 50, 30, 20. I don't think they had a way to kind of capture that data at that point because they weren't on the same systems. But we've got that advantage now of being able to use that as sort of a gauge of how much the system's being used.
Well, I guess where I was going with this is if there is a linkage between population and the size of the municipality, that's an input or a driver to airtime utilization. It would seem that over a 10-year period, that might fluctuate and change these numbers. Or are we setting this up to say for now and the next 10 years, Marion's paying 11.62%?
I think the idea is to set the percentage now for the 10-year period.
Okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
Quick. How do we budget this? I mean, has this been a capital item in the past and now it's going to become an operating expense?
I'm going to say in the past, we haven't paid.
I don't know that we've paid a lot. I can recall we did, I think the last major overhaul, it was a capital project. But aside from that, I think we've just replaced things as they've come up and we've had to. I don't know that it has been a budgeted item.
So basically, in a nutshell, going forward, this will be a new operating expense line.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Colette and then Randy.
So if I understand what you said previously, the percentages were based on different criteria than these percentages because of what we had access to. Is that accurate?
Correct.
And it seems like this would be a way for us to make a decision is based on how much time we're actually using it than the other criteria that we were using. Is that what you're suggesting as well?
I do. And I think it would lock us into that percentage. And going forward, if we would, you take that chance. If we said, okay, let's look at it again in 5 years. Well, what if we go up to 15%? Now we're losing. So I think that would be the question for you guys is, are you comfortable with doing that for the 10 years? Are you comfortable with like 12% or do you want to go more or less? And I can take that back to the board, the Radio Governors Board.
Seems like, right, locking it in around that 11.6 or 12% makes sense. I mean, that's paying for our portion of what we're using and using our taxpayer dollars wisely. So based on the information you've provided, seems like that's a good place to be from my perspective.
Randy.
Thank you, Chief. One of the concerns I have is when we take a look at this click time or air time, when we take a look at commercial property, all of the residents of a commercial property are charged what's called a common area maintenance fee. So they split those resources and they're charged appropriately, which is similar to what you just mentioned about all of these cities and municipalities that are in contract. My concern is Lynn County generates a revenue for being under contract with those municipalities. So they're being reimbursed as a line item for their use of their 911 or their radio traffic. Are the numbers that you're seeing, is that including air traffic time that in my mind is possibly not being sought after because it's coming underneath the jurisdiction of Lynn County's radio traffic?
Yeah, so on this chart, the way these numbers came out, Lynn County was roughly 40%. They jumped, I think it was about 9%. So I've got the breakdown of that. 4.2% was Hiawatha PD and fire. 3.45 was Mount Vernon. 0.5% was Robbins PD. So it is built into the Lynn County's airtime totals.
Okay, perfect. And that's what I was wondering. I want to make sure we had total transparency of radio traffic communication on that, because as we had talked about, these expenditures keep going up, but we don't have the resources of revenues to backfill that, which, if we provided those services to other communities, we could generate the revenue as well too. So I wanted to make sure that we had total transparency on what was going on with that. So thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
So are we okay? Do you want 12%? Is that what you're comfortable with, that I can take that back to the board? The radio governance, are you okay? Is that appropriate, Kara? I don't know if I'm.
2%, 2%'s too low?
Yeah. Well,
What if we just ask if anybody's opposed to that?
There can't be any formal action, but there's been like other department discussion. So it is an agenda item. So you can get kind of a consensus.
Yeah, is that anyone opposed to it? Speak up. Okay, I think we have a consensus.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, now that brings us to the closed session.
Mayor, at this time, I move to adjourn to closed session regarding personnel matters as permitted under sections 21.51I of the Code of Iowa.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn to closed session regarding personnel matters as permitted by the Code of Iowa. May we have the council's statement, please?
Thank you, Your Honor. I've reviewed the proposed subject matter for the closed session and find the same to be appropriate under Iowa Code Section 21.51I.
Okay, any discussion before we vote? Roll call, please.
Mr. Harper,
Yes.
Mr. Jensen,
Yes.
Ms. Atkins,
Yes.
Mayor Abu Osley,
Yes.
Mr. Brandt,
Yes.
Ms. Menzer. Yes. Mr. Sterned.
Yes.
We're adjourned to closed session. We'll return to open session upon completion. Thanks for joining us.